World War II marks the turning point of world economic power. The United States of America has overtaken the British Empire as the world-leading superpower. As the nation who invented the concept of democracy, to this very day, it is a grand experiment that no human society in history has ever conducted before. Since its launch, it introduced the stability that a society needs to incubate the enormous innovation by its citizens, which raised the standard of living that was unprecedented in any kingdom. The question comes to mind: who makes it happen and how? Why the United States but not China? How World War II caused the shifting of world power? Are we currently experiencing the same shift of power from the United States to China? The entire 1800s was dominated by the British Empire's commerce, sea power, and naval dominance. While British Empire possessed colonies spread across today's east coastline of North America, Caribbean, Australia, and India, in 1783, one person said no to British colonization and fought and won the war that marked the start of the Nation of Freedom, the War of Independence. And this person's name is George Washington. George Washington was born in a wealthy Virginia family and later became the first president of the United States. He was the founding father of a lot of the bases of the democratic system of America, such as won the War of Independence, set up two-term limit for president. However, the greatest achievement of Washington was the first successful transition of a democratic government to John Adams. Even though the vote was only open to white male landowners, it's still something. Government transition may seem mundane to us, just throwing money in a campaign, vote and debate, bang, you have a president. However, prior to 1900, the transition under the monarchy hereditary leadership was never a smooth process. In Europe at the time, if the monarch died, the crown went to the monarch's firstborn son, no matter how young or ill-equipped this person was as national leader. It is lucky you have an inheritor that was as strong as Kangxi, who inherited the Qing dynasty in China when he was 8 years old and created the most prosperous society in China at the time. That is the best case scenario. The worst case scenario, however, was that if the current national leader died, there was no agreement of who the legitimate leader was. The factions with the most political and military power would have conflict that could extend to 100 years. Just like the stories in many novels or TV series where two sons of the emperor turned to each other and fought for the crown, the kingdom was brought into complete chaos. All in all, with the successful transition of the first democratic government, it introduced one of the most important characteristics of the future success of America: stability. With a stable governing system, you don't need to worry about a civil war or major protests every 40 or 50 years after the ruler died. Stability is the founding stone of a good democracy. America is certainly the most innovative country in the world. After Washington introduced stability into democratic leadership, the second greatest thing he brought about was to create the U.S. Constitution in the fall of 1787. At the same time, the First Amendment was signed to protect the right to religion and free speech. One of the items was, the Congress shall have power to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. Previously, invention was mainly the domain of the rich and the well-educated. Now, average people are provided the opportunity of building their own wealth through value creation. No matter who it is, anybody who is willing to create something by his own hand had the chance to jump up classes, be admired by society, and of course, earn a lot of money, which the American system cultivated very well up to this day. Even though the American system provided stability and advocates for innovation, it took America over 100 years to finally catch up with the European nations like the United Kingdom. However, This is not to say that the American system was bad. If you put a 3-year-old on a racetrack, even a clunky overweight is able to outpace him. Like every breakthrough, it takes time. There are 3 forces that caused the America to overtake the British Empire as the world-leading superpower. First is resources. In order to grow the economy, a country needs resources. There are 2 ways to get it, either from your own land or extract it from somewhere else through trade or possession. British empires since the 1800s have been extracting resources through colonization that spread across the world. America, on the other hand, has a huge amount of arable farmland as well as oil deposits and valuable commodities conveniently located on its mainland rather than in other countries overseas. Colonization has its own side effect. When the UK started colonizing and developing other regions, it exported said democracy as well. Eventually, its components wished for autonomy. Decolonization movements were already happening decades before World War II. World War II just amplified it. After World War II, the UK did not have the means to maintain their colonies. It lost many of her possessions, such as China and India, during the late 1940s. Second is industrialization. Industrialization started in the UK, but America soon surpassed it in 1913 as the world's largest economy thanks to its conveniently located natural resources. During the latter half of the 19th century, America's population was growing at a much faster rate than Britain, and many of the immigrants were coming from Europe as well. This also fueled America's industrialization. Both world wars, especially World War II, boosted industrial output for America. America was dragged into war after World War II had started. Before it entered both wars, America was pretty much an isolated continent only to focus on developing its own economy. When it was dragged into the war, it served as the Allies' main proprietor of weapons, supplies, and other goods. At the time, America produced the most number of ships and planes than all other nations combined. In addition, America was the only country that possessed the power of the atomic weapon. At the same time, the UK has lost many of its colonies and eventually lost the war. World War II depleted UK severely, while America was the sole country that was not ruined by the war. Third, currency. Prior to World War I, Britain was still the center of commerce. Most of the trade was transacted in British pounds. At that time, the world was still on gold standard, where developed countries maintained their currency convertibility to gold. Because of World War I, many countries needed more money to finance the war and broke their peg to gold. Their currency devalued. 3 years into the war, Britain found itself having to borrow money for the first time. 1919, Britain finally broke the gold standard, thus destroying the bank accounts of international merchants who traded in pounds. On the other side, America at the time already became the largest economy in the world and was not so much involved in years of conflicts like many European countries. Naturally, it became the lender of choice for many developed countries. Many countries obtained US dollars through dollar-denominated bonds. By then, the dollar had replaced the pound as the world's leading reserve currency. Prior to entering World War II, America served as the Allies' main proprietor of weapons, supplies, and other goods, collecting payment in gold. By the end of the war, America owned the majority of the world's gold. 1944, 730 delegates from 44 Allied countries met in a small vacation house in Brentwood, New Hampshire, to come up with a system to manage stable foreign exchange that would not put any country at a disadvantage. Because the US owned the majority of the world's gold, it was decided that the world's currencies linked to the dollar and the dollar linked to gold. This arrangement, which came to be known as the Bretton Woods Agreement, officially set the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. The Bretton Woods Agreement served as the backbone of the global financial system, which results in the creation of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. Let's summarize how America became the world's leading superpower. First, America's first president, George Washington, created the democratic system that almost all Western countries adopted today. This system provides as well as curates two crucial elements to the development of the modern world: stability and innovation. 2. How America overtook Britain as the world's leading superpower. First, resources. America has a vast amount of natural resources on its mainland. It utilized it extremely well, adopted isolation policy to focus on building its internal power instead of excessively attending to external conflicts. Britain, on the other hand, extracted its resources by colonization, which at the same time exported said democracy that caused decolonization that diminished its power over time. Second, industrialization. Even though Britain started industrialization, America soon surpassed it before World War I due to its conveniently located natural resources as well as population growth. Innovation, of course, played a crucial role that makes America the sole nation that possessed the atomic weapon during World War II. Third, currency. Scholars say whoever controls the currency controls the world. After World War II, US dollar replaced British pound as the world's reserve currency and currency for international trade. Now, as we know a tiny bit more about history, we can describe what's going on today and dare to use our imagination and attempt to answer the question. Like 100 years ago, is China overtaking America now? Today's America faces many problems. Since Trump claimed presidency, the government is largely dysfunctional. The wealth gap is the largest since the 1920s. Conflicts are rising between the rich and poor. With the printing of money to fight the coronavirus depression, the whole country has piled up debt that was unprecedented in history. At the same time, there's another nation rising and is about to surpass America. Like when America surpassed Britain during World War II. All just sounds too familiar at this juncture of time. So, is coronavirus in 2020 the disruption for a new world order? China, one of the world's largest countries, was a dominant power for centuries before the steep decline in the 1800s. By Bridgewater Associates' estimate, China stands second in the measurement of wealth and power. If we follow the idea of whoever controls the currency controls the world, China is still a pretty minor force in the world financial system. As of fourth quarter of 2019, the US dollar covers more than 60% of the world's reserve currency. Approximately 40% of the world's debt is denominated in dollars. Majority of international trade is still conducted by dollar. If we think government debt and economic power as the two leading indicators that caused the shift of world power between America and Britain in the 1940s, then China does have an edge. America's government debt to GDP is over 100%, while China is only 16%. China has already surpassed America in a share of world GDP, the most important component to the measurement of wealth and power. However, if you look at GDP per capita, which measures the average income for citizens, you get a very different picture. Just before World War I, an average American was already richer than a British citizen. However, the income of a Chinese citizen in 2019 is still 3 times smaller than an average American folk. One thing we can be sure of, we're going through Thucydides' trap, where a rising power challenges existing power. Over the last 500 years, these conditions have occurred 16 times. 12 of them ended up being wars. Could we see a third world war? Is deglobalization going to happen? Or everything just go back to normal? Well, we may know these sooner than later.